Good afternoon. What a privilege and a joy for me to welcome each of you to this, the 29th Estelle Osborne Legacy Celebration. My name is Jim Pace. I'm Senior Associate Dean for Academic Programs at NYU Myers. Executive Vice Dean Sean Clark is under the weather today, and so as good nurses, we urged him to stay at home and to feel better. So on his behalf, and on behalf of Dean Eileen Sullivan Marks, who you will be hearing more in the next part of our day, welcome each of you as well. So first and foremost, we gather here to celebrate Estelle Massey Osborne and the many gifts that she gave to the world. She paved the way for multiple opportunities for Black nurses throughout the United States. She was the first Black woman to receive a master's degree in nursing from Teachers College, Columbia University. Her lifetime was devoted to fiercely battling discriminatory policies and practices in all areas of nursing, practice, education, and research. In 1946, she was NYU's first Black faculty member in what was then the nursing department. We will hear more about this courageous, multi-talented woman throughout the rest of the afternoon. Just a few words about the success of what is now named the Rory Myers College of Nursing. In regard to our traditional freshman nursing class at NYU Myers, I want you all to hear this. We admit 65 students. These are your classic undergraduate right out of high school. We admit 65 students each fall to NYU Myers. This past fall, we received over 2,000 applications for those 65 slots. That's the highest ever applicant pool. For the traditional undergraduate class at NYU as a whole, this past fall, NYU received over 85,000 applications. Another record, also in regard to the student body. This past fall, NYU is a majority-minority school. Over 50% of our faculty self-identify as a racial, ethnic, and/or gender minority in nursing. That sense of belonging is one of three core elements in our upcoming strategic plan due to be released early in the fall of 2020. February is also Black History Month. It gives us time, not enough to be sure, but time to recognize the accomplishments of Black Americans and the centrality of Black contributions to American history and culture. And of course, in the process, it gives us way too much time to wonder the distance yet to travel to achieve equal equity in our society. With that being said, and with 2020, this year, being the year of the nurse and the midwife, today we have an amazing panel that brings life to decades of professional experience in working with women, children, and families. They will offer their perspectives on one of the most important and distressing health disparity of our time, the health and well-being of Black women, especially those giving birth. The moderator of today's panel is Dr. Mimi Niles, one of NYU Myers PhD grads who's a midwife working in Brooklyn, and who is also a postdoctoral fellow at the Birthplace Lab at the University of British Columbia in Vancouver. Her program of research is oriented toward building equity and liberation for marginalized, minoritized people. Today's distinguished panel includes three people: Helena Grant, the Director of Midwifery and OBGYN Services at NYU Langone Hospital. Helena, if you'll raise your hand so everybody will know. She serves as the co-chair of the NYC Department of Health and Mental Hygiene's Maternity, Mortality, and Morbidity Review Committee. She is a modern clinician and healer, cultivating women's spiritual, physical, mental, and soulful wellness. Roberta Holder Mosley is the director of the New York City Department of Health and Mental Hygiene, Nurse Family Partnership Bureau of Maternal, Infant, and Reproductive Health. She has a long and distinguished history as a commissioned officer in the U.S. Public Health Service Corps and provides a full range of midwifery services. And rounding out our panel is one of our grads as well, Sasha James Contarelli, a member of the Nursing and Midwifery faculty at Yale School of Nursing. Dr. Contrelli is the president of the American College of Nurse Midwives New York State affiliate, New York State Association of Not Licensed Midwives. She serves as co-chair of Governor Cuomo's Maternal Mortality and Racial Disparities Task Force. There is so much more that I could say about each of these talented, devoted, and courageous women, but then we wouldn't have time for their presentation. So at this point, without further words, I will turn it over to Dr. Niles, our moderator. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I do want to just take a moment and have the audience just say Estelle Osborne's name. I think learning her history and her legacy should be an inspiration to all of us. And I really do think it's important as a nursing community that we learn the names of these nurses who are vanguards. And I think I don't feel right calling her Stell. I know that's what everyone called her, but I'd really like to, as a collective, just say her name, Estelle Osborne. So on the count of 3, 1, 2, 3. Estelle Osborne. Definitely a legacy, and the reason why I think all the four of us are up here today. So as you heard, I'm a practicing midwife in Brooklyn, and I happen to be sitting next to my boss. And I want to start the question, I see a lot of familiar faces here, so you may already be conscious of some of this data, but I think it is important to ground the conversation in what is actually happening in real time for human beings, for human people, for women. So according to the most recent World Health Organization's report on maternal health, the US ranking in terms of maternal mortality has dropped. We were at 46 and now we're at 55. That's not something to be proud of. So despite spending more, having more technology, and having more interventions for the people we care for, Black and Indigenous women suffer the consequences because they are 2 to 4 times more likely to die from a pregnancy-related complication when compared to white women. And this is even when you control for education, because that's all often the party line is that it's about health literacy, but we're seeing that it's not. So I'd like each of the panelists to share with us, can you think about or talk us through one contributing factor to help us understand these failures?
Well, I'll go first. I think one of the main issues that we see is that not enough time and energy is put into discovering and pulling back the onion on the epigenetic effects of Black women that have descended from slavery. The epigenetic consequences of slavery, the epigenetic consequences of Black women modern day being weathered in whatever environment that they land in. I think those two contributing factors together is what puts us so much at risk when we enter into what should be the sacred time of pregnancy. And so we have not discovered and really realized the full implications of the woman's mother's birth story and her grandmother's birth story and her grandmother's grandmother's birth story. And we don't pay attention to that. She's there now. We deal with that now. And we don't look at the trauma that she is holding within her. I often say to women that I treat and people that I just talk to about these issues, we all have issues in our tissues. But what information and what tools are we giving women and people to be able to unpack these issues, to be able to process these issues, and to be able to live in a healing way? And so it's a big call, but I think we're looking small. We're looking clinical, and we're looking at things from a very medicalized perspective still. Even when we add social determinants of health, that really doesn't cut it for me. I think it's much bigger. And to be truly holistic, we have to add in these other elements.
Thank you. And I think I would also add that we need to truly look at the comprehensive need for care, the comprehensiveness of the care that should be offered. A few centuries ago, when I was in clinical practice, they talked about doing a true history, doing a personal history, doing a family history, and making it comprehensive. Those were the days before the DRGs. Those were the days when you were told, before you were told how many minutes you had for a visit. We asked deep questions. We asked deep follow-up questions. And we individualized it based on the information that we got from the client that we served or the patient that we served in the room that day at that time. We don't do that anymore. There's a whole host of information that we don't have at our fingertips that, quite frankly, would influence how we practice and how we cared for that lady who was sitting in that room at that time.
So I want to add to that and round that out. My colleagues have basically said most of it, but I want to add that we need to also have a deeper understanding of not only the person that's sitting in front of us, but the community in which they reside. And beyond the community in which they reside, where they come from, what's important to that person in front of you, what are their goals, not only for their birthing process, but for their entire life. What do they think what are the most important factors for them? Often when a person is sitting in front of us, we consider the medicalized version of and the condition for which they present. We don't have the time due to many factors to think about where does this person come from and where are they going back to? What do they hold as important factors for them in their life and for their families' lives? All of those things, in consideration with what my colleagues have said, is comprehensive care. We fail many women in the United States and families in the United States in providing comprehensive care. And so the system that we've designed is yielding the results that we see today. And I say we because I'm part of that. We designed this system and we need to break it and fix it and rebuild it again with a consideration of the people that we care for, first looking at them as human beings.
Thank you. I mean, I would also add that, yes, I think we are part of sustaining that system, but the system was built at a time and a place where we were not in any way, and by we I mean people of color, particularly enslaved peoples, they were not part of the organization or the design of those systems of care, and if anything, they were actively excluded from those systems of care. And so the medical model that operates now, the hospital systems that operate now are still based on very old, very archaic ways of caring for a particular group of people. So I would say the nuances as nurses and as nurse midwives and nurse researchers and nurse scientists, our job is to not sustain the system as it is.
And I'd like to add, not only they were also exploited in those systems and are still exploited in those systems. Black women are largely practiced on when they go into teaching hospitals. They don't have care providers that look like them, that come from their native cultures, or that are willing to step outside the box and get additional education, because we have clinical education, but when you want to serve a population, there's a consciousness that I hope as we move forward, people are willing to reach. And that means engaging in some other forms of study that will make you understand and help you understand the population that you're showing up to every day, hopefully to serve. So I just wanted to add that.
I would also add, Helena, that one of the things that we're guilty of, and I unfortunately painfully heard from some of the clients that we serve across the state is sometimes we perpetuate that system, and we continue as people of color that are providing care to continue to harm our own, because the system was built in such a way to continue to marginalize those that are most vulnerable. And if we buy into the medical model, that means that we continue to perpetuate that same system. So then we continue to hurt our own if we are providers of care that happen to be of color. And I've heard it, unfortunately, from women in the governor's listening sessions. It's the most painful thing to hear, that I, as a person of color, as a Black woman, will continue to hurt and perpetuate the pain and the trauma that Black women across the state are having to endure while they are seeking care.
Thank you. So transitioning into, which I think is also, if we think about the history of childbirth care in this country, we cannot ignore the fact that historically care was provided by midwives that were rooted in their own communities. And in particular, we can think about the Grand Southern Black midwives who had a strong, strong tradition of caring for people in their communities, learning by apprenticeship, learning through the legacy of their grandmothers and their mothers. Unfortunately, and at that time, roughly 60 to 70% of people were having babies with their midwives in attendance. We know now that that is not the case, that midwifery is in some ways marginalized. Nurse midwifery is in some ways marginalized as a profession as well. And I'd really like us to talk through what do you think the role of the nurse midwife is in the current climate that we're in, where Black, Indigenous, and other marginalized groups are really suffering and being actively harmed by systems of care that actually are not rooted in a midwifery model of care.
Okay, so yes, absolutely. And I'm glad you asked that question. So for far too long, midwives have taken a back seat, not because we wanted to, but in order to advance our profession. We, as Mimi mentioned, midwives and midwifery were the first to provide care to birthing families in the United States. And the majority of midwives in the United States were slaves, providing care to all, regardless of race, religion, or geographic location. There was this huge, and it's a secret in the medical society, the abolishing of midwives in the United States and getting the midwife problem is what it was called. To get rid of midwives, and mainly was to get slaves to get away from taking care of women in their own home, in their own community, bring them into hospitals. Now, let me put this disclaimer out there. I've only been a hospital midwife, so this is not to bash hospital midwives, okay? So to get them into hospitals, right? And get them away from their own community. In some ways to practice on them, in many ways to practice on them. And now, in order for us to sustain midwifery, many of these midwives went basically underground in order to avoid prosecution. And when the American College of Nurse Midwives was first developed, they excluded Black and Indigenous midwives. And as we continued to persist, and there were very few education programs that educated midwives of color, as we grow in numbers again, it is time for us to step forward come to the forefront again and be the leaders in caring for our communities and being the ones that are the voices for the women that have been oppressed for many years, in uplifting Black and Indigenous women and abolishing maternal mortality in the United States. We can only help all women and all birthing families. So I believe it's time for the nurse midwife to step to the forefront, and I believe it's time for our nurses and midwives to allow Black, Native, and Indigenous midwives to step to the forefront and help and lead the way to abolish maternal mortality. For many years, we've been in the background supporting our white midwives to sustain our profession. Now let us come to the forefront and support us from the back.
For me, it's about moving into the space and always understanding what that means and being a vanguard in the space. It's much of what Sasha mentioned, but for me, it's also being a person who's unafraid and unapologetic about calling it out, not just in a room like this with friendly faces, but in places where it hurts and it can be harmful to you to call it out. Where you understand that to whom much is given, much is required, and you have to show up sometime expecting to be weathered until things change, because you want the midwives that come behind you, that you pass the baton to have it better. Because if they have it better, the women, people, and birthing families will have it better. It means that we have to call out issues in education programs where we don't have diverse faculty, where we don't have diverse classes of midwives graduating. We have to look at the structure of midwifery in this country. Is it okay for people to birth in hospital and be comfortable with that? Are we providing not only safe care, but satisfying care? Are we making it the hospital, which the etymology of the word hospital is hotel for healing? Are we making hospital stays, no matter what a person comes in for, no matter what race and creed they come in for, are we making it a safe and sacred healing experience? Because we don't recognize birth as healing. We recognize birth as torturous, and we don't see our role in it. It's something to get over. And so there is a deep unpacking that needs to happen. And once we unpack these conceptualizations, what we can do is create room for new thoughts and new input process to go inside. And what we have to really be truthful about is in the United States right now, we have a mostly white midwifery workforce, okay? The majority of women who seek midwifery care or who just happen upon midwifery care who are of color, 94% of them still birth their baby into the hands of white women. Why is that? Why is that still okay in 2020? And what are people going to do about it? And so for me, it becomes about looking at this question that I always have in my head. What is the obsession with? Is the obsession about caring for Black women? I don't think it is, else we wouldn't have the maternal mortality and morbidity statistics that we have. What is the other obsession, and why aren't people of color being allowed to care for their own? So I think as we continue moving these conversations forward and we start thinking about things on a deep level, we'll start to notice a shift.
I am going to approach my response just a little differently. Historically, I was one of the newer midwives in the 70s. And in addition to the importance of taking care of Black and brown women who are pregnant and birthing, we need to learn, we need to encourage, we need to reinforce the need to take care of the Black and brown women who are taking care of the Black and brown women. Because the scars that the Black and brown practitioner carries from working in the hospital system that we did not help design is horrendous. None of it was ever easy. It didn't matter what day of the week you walked into the hospital, you understood that if you stood your ground, You've had to face the chief of OB. You had to face the chief resident who knew he knew more than you did. You had to face the nurses who in the early days did not support the midwife, even if she looked like the midwife. So while we are lifting up our clients and our populations and our communities, we need to remember that the other community that we need to lift up are the Black and brown women who also serve.
Wow, absolutely. That I feel that in my heart and my gut so deeply as someone who's still actively an active practitioner. And I tell Helena all the time that it is so exhausting at the end of the day to fight for women in the way that we have to fight in these settings. Where I work, we only take care of Black and brown women. And I think it's something I hope that for those of you who are practitioners, current or past or future, that it's really something that you bring to the forefront of your own practice, that these are things that can exist as ideas, but can also manifest in your hands and how you speak to people. I had this question later, but I think I'm going to ask it now because it sort of dovetails off what Roberta said. So hopefully everyone in the room knows that 2020 marks the year of the nurse and the midwife, which is a wonderful thing. And in celebration of this, I'd like to know what advice you would give the next generation of nurses and nurse midwives, particularly what are the skills and the awareness and the consciousness needed to create more justice and equity, not just in the people we care for, but in who we are as a workforce, because I think that really is what Roberta is talking about. What is it about us as a community, a collective group of nurses and nurse midwives? What can we do to take care of each other as well as the people we serve?
I'll start.
Yes.
I think one of the first things we have to do is to open the doors for everyone who truly wants to work and become a professional nurse, licensed midwife, certified midwife, whatever the pathway, to provide maternal and child health quality, comprehensive. My team is back there. They know I say these words all the time. Quality, comprehensive maternal and child health services. Open the doors, let them in. We are not a threat. We can only work to make it better. That's one. Two, tell the students who are coming in the truth of what it takes to do the work and what the work is that they have got to put in every day in order to get it done. Three, do not attack them for wanting to come to the table to serve. Because one of the things that we do not do well, we don't support each other completely, comprehensively, with compassion, with love. We don't do that. It's like, I made it, you go make it. Not the way to do it. We have got... We have got to figure out how to do it better. For after all these years, we should have realized it doesn't work. It really does not work. 4, have forums for students to honestly be able to talk about what their challenges are. They should not go back to their dorms, their rooms, their roommates, wherever. They shouldn't have to go back at the end of the day and wonder, why isn't this working for me? Figure out how to help them succeed. I'll stop now.
You could go on. Yeah, keep going.
The only thing I'm going to add is what I said before. There's an unpacking that needs to happen. There is an education that anyone who decides they want to touch another person's body, especially when that person does not look like them, they need to commit to doing. And it's not just reading one book or two books, because I'm seeing a lot of that, or going to one implicit bias training, or going to one trauma-informed training, because that's getting real sexy too out here. It's really about understanding that if you commit to show up and work with a particular population, and like me, with your privilege, because I have it too as a Black woman, you get to drive away and go back to the suburbs, you still need to be in a space of knowingness about what these people endure on a daily basis, what their challenges are on a daily basis, who their mother, father, and partners are, what socio determinants of health are affecting the way they can show up and occupy the space of the care systems that you're offering them, when they retreat, to not say they're non-compliant, but find encouraging ways to re-engage them so that they want to show up and reconnect with the care system, and to unpack some of the blame-based things that go on, where like the person is being bad, they don't really like their kids. I mean, the amount of things that I've heard, or even that I heard yesterday. I was trying not to get arrested yesterday. You know, just really, really amazed me. And I think we have to be able to marry the historical perspectives and perceptions about birth, especially when it comes to Black women, with the things that they have endured. There's no marrying of those conceptualizations. We see a woman show up and we're not looking at what it took for her to get there. If we're having appointments from 9 to 5, but she is a working woman, she can't get there 9 to 5. What are we doing to give her access? If she has children to pick up and we keep her there for a long time, what does that do to her level of anxiety? Are we causing her to have high blood pressure a lot of times, and then saying when she leaves that she's non-compliant? So to be able to look at not just the hospital structure, but independent of the hospital structure, the structures that sit adjacent and outside, but are really all connected to the systemic failure of why people show up in the space that they do, and be able to start to really have some conversations that unpack that, marry that to the history, and really decide to put in a deeper work regarding understanding, and not just understanding, being committed to doing something about it.
So I'm just going to add to that, in that in the beginning, I was introduced, I work at Yale, and I'm faculty at Yale, and I also continue to practice clinically. And when I practice clinically, it is only Black and brown women that I serve. Yet, as a provider in the outpatient setting that I'm in, I'm the only person of color providing care. And so when we talk about being weathered and what it really takes as a student when you choose to path to become a nurse or become a midwife, and you're a person of color, every time that I go to see patients, which is real for me and why I continue to do the work, at the end of the day, I feel like, and I've run a marathon, I feel like I've run a marathon. Why am I feeling tired? Not only physically, but mentally the next day, and wanting to sleep longer. And how am I teaching my students and imparting to them the importance of giving your all? Because see, why I'm tired at the end of the day is because I give my all to my patients. And we have to be willing to do that. And it's not about a paycheck and how many days I'm going to get off and how many letters are after my name, but that I'm really willing and committed to serving my community, to being that face, that familiar face for them. So when students are there with me, they understand there's this unspoken thing that we have. There's this unspoken language. I can hug my patients And if you're 20 minutes late, I'm still going to see you. And they will tell the receptionist in the front, can you ask Sasha if she'll still see me? And I'll always say yes, because I'm there to serve. And by being that the only provider of color, what I'm also imparting to my students is that you better be committed when you're here with me. We may stay late. Sorry. I got a dinner date too. I'll call my husband. I'm late. This is the work. It doesn't matter how many letters are after my name. My patients call me Sasha. My mom named me Sasha. You call me Sasha. Because I am one of you. When I leave that office, at the end of the day, I walk down the street, I say it all the time, I'm just another black girl. No one sees my letters. I have privilege. I go to Westchester too. Nobody knows I'm going there. Cops don't know that. But I am still just a black girl. And so seeing patients for me is my reality. It keeps me grounded. It's why we do what we do. And it allows me to come here and be with you guys today and be real. And it's painful. But it keeps me going. That's me continuing the legacy of my mother, my grandmother, and also imparting that knowledge to students. Either you join and be 100% with me, or choose another profession, sorry.
I want to add, my mic is not on, I have a really big mouth.
Yes, you do. But that's
I want to add one more thing. I think it's also important in these conversations to also talk about strategy. Just like this great woman whose picture is above me, who when I did research on her, I found out she's actually my sorority sister, a most gracious lady of the Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated. Just to understand that to be strategic means you don't move alone. It means that you garner a team and understand that I tell students all the time, I am very blessed to be a director in a hospital that welcomes midwives, that really respects what we bring, and that the medical doctors that we work with really get what midwifery is about. And so not to be daunted when you enter certain care systems and that is not the reality. To be able to be in a place for a season, see if it is going to shift, and then if not, go where you're appreciated. Be strategic about being weathered for a while, but not being weathered always. And also understanding that there are great physicians and great nurses that will align with you in a team approach to give the best care for the women and people you serve.
And all the while continuing to recognize that we have a lot of work left to do. I left clinical midwifery practice in 1984, and I became an administrator. And I am deeply disturbed that the very same issues that we talked about between 1978 and 1984, when I was in clinical practice, are right here looking us in the face today. It is appalling.
Yeah, I think in 2020 to still be an only in a space that you're in it's unacceptable. And I hope that for the leadership in the room and the people who are making the decisions, some of it, who are up here, the consciousness to bring a diverse group of people to those decision-making spaces are so key. To the educational spaces are key. To the creative spaces are key. So to hear Sasha say that she's an only at Yale, it's in 2020, it's really, really heartbreaking. So we only have 10 more minutes, and I wanted to ask the group, sorry, I got myself all just listening with my whole heart. So unless you've been living under a rock, you know that it's election season, which sometimes makes you want to go live under a rock. But we are hearing for the first time, I would say, elected officials and presidential candidates talk about Black maternal mortality. Yet funding and research is really lagging in this space. So for those of you out there who are civically engaged, I want to understand more, and what advice would you all give as leaders of how nurses and midwives can make an impact in the civic space?
Go first. Okay, fine. I actually learned a lot from you, Helena. I met Helena, I heard about, because I lived in Brooklyn, I grew up in Brooklyn, and heard about the director of midwifery at Woodhull Medical Center, that she attends the community board meetings as a midwife to find out more about her community. And then I called her up one day and I said I was going to the food bazaars local in Bushwick Avenue, if anyone knows. And I said, I'm going to my food bazaar. She said, girl, I shop there. I said, you live in Westchester. She said, so I shop at the food bazaar too. And I say all this to say in that even though you and many of us work in communities in which we do not live, right? One way that we need to be engaged in and have a deeper understanding of the community that we serve is to go out into that community and get a better understanding of that community. Learn who the elected officials are in that community. Find out more about what's important to those people that reside in the community. Who would you serve? And become actively engaged in that community. I know we do that, and I hope we do that where we live. We're encouraged to do that where we live. But also where you provide service is very important as well. Now, on a bigger scale, I mean, I'm the president of the New York State Association for Licensed Midwives, which is our ACNM affiliate. We do advocacy, and a lot of advocacy. But at the very foundation, the grassroots, is getting communities together, because when we go to Albany or we go to Washington, D.C., the biggest voices are people from the communities. I can dress nice and all that, but the amount of people that we see that rally and come from communities, now that's a statement. So for me, the importance is understanding the clients that you serve and getting to know that community first.
Okay, my mic is on. I'll share just a little story. In my role as one of the only Black directors in New York City and possibly across the country, it was always my vision to take midwifery and to take my time in the seat to a place it had never been. I understood very clearly that meant standing inside the space and feeling the fullness of it, but being very willing to step outside the space and connect with people that I might not have had I not been, the universe had not granted me this role. In doing that, as Sasha mentioned, showing up at community board meetings, and just a lot of times people work someplace and they go in the parking lot and they go into where they work, walking around the neighborhood, really kind of feeling the energy of where you show up to work. I ended up meeting the councilman for where Woodhull is, Antonio Reynoso, and later on, I came to find out that his wife was pregnant. And I engaged them. And I got other persons involved, my chair involved, the medical director involved, the CEO of the hospital involved, and him and his wife became our clients. And his wife later, and not because I came in for her, it's just the universe made it so that I was working and she birthed her baby into my hands. We are so close now. It is just beyond. A lot of times we're doing work, but we hide in the hospital. Nurses hide. Midwives surely hide, and we really have to stop hiding. We do great work, but we do it, we drive in, and we leave, and nobody knows but the patients you took care of that day, and they're really grateful to you, and you leave. But people need to know what we do. They need to understand the fullness of what we do. There need to be conscious conversations that we have with them to make them understand at a greater capacity what we do, because then they will align with us, and if we have to engage in the fight with us to move things forward. And so that has been a great relationship. And, you know, sometimes he will joke and call himself an honorary midwife sometime, and I'll have to say, now you're going too far. But, you know, it has really blossomed into now this elected official who sits on the city council and who is, you know, a masculine energy, being able to talk so forcefully about his wife's birth experience and how she was cared for totally by midwives and what that meant to their experience as a couple. And so I think that this is part of my strategic brain right now about moving things forward, not to hide. It's okay to be the first. It's not okay to be the only, but it's never okay to hide.
I think the only thing that I would add would be coordination, integration, collaboration, partnership are not buzzwords. They are real. They are what we need to do every single day to move the mission forward.
Now, I want to go back to the fact that everybody keeps saying that, you know, it's not okay for me to be the only. I do recognize that there has to be a first. Remember, I said that I'm taking care of only Black and brown
I
women.
said it was okay to be the first.
Yeah, but I can't be, it's not okay for me to be the only in 2020. And I do understand that for students to fully understand, sometimes there has to be someone that forges the way. And so I go and I continue to go. As although I can get weathered, I'm building my team. It's a strategic plan. Stop playing with me.
Thank you. A footnote to Helena's story, she's now an honorary Dominican,
Yes.
which is true. She was honored at the Dominican Day Parade. So there's pluses to this job, some extras. So we only have 2 more minutes, and I do want to honor the fact that Estelle Osborne was the first Black faculty at the School of Nursing, and really turn this back towards, I do hope there are some students here. I think there are, although in some ways we are all students. If you can just offer 1 or 2 sentences of either encouragement or inspiration or enlightenment that we can use to sort of feed our spirits.
Believe that you can. Believe every single day that you can and that you are not alone. I used to tell my family that I stand on the shoulders of all of the diploma nurses, from my mother and all of her classmates down. I stand on their shoulders. When I look behind me at them, I have no other choice but to succeed and to move forward.
So words of wisdom. It's so interesting that you said believe in yourself. Anyone that personally knows me knows that I'm a hip hop head. So I was listening to the music when on my way in, and there is a new song by Justin Timberlake and Meek Mill, and the words in that song is exactly that: believe in yourself, and understand that you don't stand alone, because sometimes you have to be your own champion, and look within. Never give up. And although it's okay to be the first, always have those behind you and remember who came before you. They fill you. And build your army. These ladies up here, we know each other. This is part of my army, actually. Understand that you need an army. Never forget where you came from. It helps you to understand where you're going.
You have the last word, right?
I have to. For me, everything is a metaphor for gestation and birth. And to show up in a space and be willing to cultivate, be willing to create, be willing to gestate, and to do what it takes to continue evolving your consciousness, keep evolving your soul, keep evolving your spirit, because those are the things that are going to undergird the physical manifestation that you are in the space. And when you're able to do that, then you're able to continuously give birth to yourself unapologetically.
Thank you so much. So we're going to turn it over to you and have a fuller shared experience. So we're going to have, I think, 15 minutes to take questions from our guests. Does anyone? We have people walking around with a mic, I think. Who's going to be the first and not the only?
So first of all, thank you so much to the four of you for such an illuminating discussion. Very powerful and very provoking. Thank you for that. As an emergency department provider, we provide care on a fleeting basis. And oftentimes it is horribly, painfully aware. I'm painfully aware of the fact that we have patients that come in of color who are disadvantaged, who don't have the benefit of making their primary care appointments because they are working several jobs to make ends meet. In that experience, I wonder how best I can advocate for that patient as they continue their journey through the hospital system. And I wonder what advice you might have for someone who's providing just an instant of care for the briefest moment of time, and how to most effectively advocate for that person as they make their way through the system.
Actually, the word that came to mind that you said at the end was advocate for that patient. Because that's what they need. Even if it's just for 2 minutes. Think beyond the immediate. How can you help them do a little better? Ask if they need a prescription. Do they have a way to fill that prescription before you write that script and send them on their way? Because they may not.
I want to say that even from right here, I can feel your energy. So, and that gets me choked up because that lets me know that the patients you serve, they feel your energy. So I'm going to say keep letting them feel your energy, because that's important to them, that you might be that person who was open enough to allow your energy in that moment to be so expansive when they were hurt, when they needed something. Never be afraid to allow the people you serve to feel your energy. I think the question that you asked, you've already been the answer, else you wouldn't be asking it.
I'd like to remind students, too, that our work is, I think particularly in the ER, people are coming to you with brokenness, literal brokenness. And so, you have to really stay grounded in making them whole again in whatever way that shape or form that takes. That can be literally putting bones back together, taping up wounds or burns, but it's also how you treat them. I would never want anyone that I touch in my care to leave my care feeling more broken or more hurt. And I think that's what we do to people over and over. And I think for Black and other minoritized communities, that pain and that hurt is in so many parts of their life that I feel like when they engage with a healthcare provider, then that should be the one place where that doesn't happen.
That's right. I don't have anything to add because I am so happy that you're here. The fact that you even came means more than anything you said.
We have another question?
Hi, I'm a nurse at NYU Lingo, and I'm an L&D nurse. And you mentioned history a lot, how it plays into how patients interact with the care system that they're getting. So a lot of the times we'll have patients who are very scared of the healthcare system, and you as a nurse, you're the one who's connecting directly with that patient. So what is the best way to connect with them and release that fear that they have? Because you want to deliver the best care, but sometimes they're scared to receive it because of the system or history that they've had in the system.
So I'll answer this as a past NYU. Tish, at the time, labor and birth nurse. And it's you and your connectedness to the patient. And again, giving of yourself and being fully present, like Helena said. I know that floor very, very, very well. I ran it when we all rotated. So, but one thing that you can do is everyone that you touch, like Mimi says, their encounter with you as a provider, they should not leave more broken than when they came in. Their experience, that 5, 10, even if you triage that patient or just put them on the monitor, that experience and interaction with you should be positive.
I also want to say that it's really important to understand you're going to heal. You can help to heal moment by moment, but the whole experience may not be what unpacks their total trauma. So don't overburden yourself with feeling like you need to unpack the total trauma. I think we need to go back to the word advocacy. A lot of times we will notice patients have been with this doctor or in sometime a midwife too for many months. They meet you on the day they're in labor and they're asking you questions that they never asked. That they never asked the whole time they had established a relationship with this other person who's in and out. And so to advocate for them, to really try to push forward what they want. And as I said, to understand that that's going to weather you. Because then, you may start to be perceived as annoying. Or, I remember I was a Cornell nurse and they would say, oh, there's a weirdo here. Helena loves those. Yeah, anytime a patient wanted a natural birth or maybe a patient was from the LGBTQI community, that was my patient because I was that nurse who was open to, I guess, what was considered then other. And so, be that person and be unapologetic about being that person. And don't be afraid to bug people and don't be afraid to stand as vanguard and even protector of a woman's birth experience because we live every day. We don't give birth every day, and it should be a safe, satisfying, and sacred experience.
You were that person too? That was me too.
Hi, I have a comment. I'm a public health practitioner, and these forums about Black severe maternal morbidity and mortality is becoming increasingly common over the past 3 years. and a little bit sexy, which is pretty problematic in and of itself, considering how long this problem has been going on and who's been at the forefront. Actually, this is the first time I've ever been to a panel or forum that had 100% women of color on the stage from any academic institution, any state jurisdiction. The majority of the time, who's held as the expert as this problem has been a normally white cisgendered male doctor, or a midwife that does not practice inside the community, or oftentimes comes from a healthcare system that segregates, that has a faculty practice that doesn't accept Medicaid, that doesn't accept Black or brown patients, and that's also because we allow it. So in the audience, we're all going to these forums. These are the forums that if there's an elected official, these are the things that are turned into policy. And so we need to make decisions about who we allow certain platforms to, and if you're a part, you can nothing for us without us. And if we are going to these kind of platforms, who are we seeing on the stage? What is their history? Where do they practice? And we've been sitting on stages or in audiences and felt this thing. This is the first time I've never been also uncomfortable, where there hasn't been something that is okay, maybe technically true, but the underpinnings of that statement leave me with a film that doesn't make me feel great. This is, even in this forum, I've never seen the moderator, the facilitator, be a Black or Indigenous person, right? So even within our own systems, we still have a tiered racial society that we cannot fix this problem if we continue to, even in the way that we talk about it, the way that we organize around it, continue to have that same racialized hierarchy. So that's my first comment, and then I have a question. My question has to do with monies, resources. So equity isn't just about diversity, it's about how we spend our money and where we spend it on and who we spend it with. And the majority of monies in this state that is spent on severe maternal morbidity and mortality goes to two places. OBs, and then second, doulas. Midwives are a very, very distant third. I work for the city, and out of our millions of dollars, how much do we spend on scaling up midwifery? It's a drop in the bucket of what we spend on trainings and catering to doctors, and then providing access to doulas. I wonder if folks have any comments on that around how midwifery has been kind of left out, even though it has more evidence than those other forms of care. But when we really talk about how the money is spent, nobody's spending it on midwives.
So can I mention that? Oh, yes. Okay. So, hi, how are you? So, being part of Governor Cuomo's task force, and it was groundbreaking in that, first of all, the task force was comprised of people of color, even though the health commissioner was technically at the head. But around the table, I was the only midwife around the table. And when we mentioned midwifery, and we as New York midwives came together to help put proposals forward to scale up midwifery. Actually, Mimi wrote them in a fly for us with supporting documentation. So, and we put those proposals forward, and they were part of the 10 steps, the first 10 steps from the governor to increase access to midwifery education, increase scholarships for midwives to attend state universities. We have state programs, Stony Brook, downstate. However, that was never actualized in the budget. We did get a maternal mortality review board. But see, the problem is, again, you go back to history. Midwives in this country, we're still seen as a threat to physicians. Why? Don't know.
You do know.
I mean, we know why, but it's so complex of like, why seriously, it's still in 2020, we're a threat, right? To a generalist OB physician. So much so that we become a distant third. So why doulas are put in front of us is because they're not seen as a threat.
That's right.
So they push midwives to the back. we could present as much evidence as we want to, they'll still push us to the back. So the only way we can be pushed forward is to increase education and advocacy for midwifery. Get our allies, council members, senators, people that have had positive experiences with midwives and midwifery, to have a voice and to say that we do need midwives. There is evidence. There's a multitude of evidence. So yes, you're absolutely right, but that's the reason why.
We live in a capitalist country, so we need to just be transparent about that. The medical profession is run on a capitalist system. It is undergirded in medical technocratic philosophies. Everything is about more technology and less time. It is undergirded in a racist understructure and a patriarchal, one of my non-favorite words that I use very often, patriarchal structure. So when we put that whole montage together, we end up here. It's going to take a while to really keep having these forums, let people know this history, and for the outcry actually to come from the public, because when you look at the other European nations that we say we mirror as an industrialized first world country, and you look at their maternal mortality and morbidity statistics, even though they have immigrant populations of Black and brown people, they may not have a lot of the history of enslavement, but they are taking care of similar, very wide-ranging populations of people who are coming there with trauma. They don't have these statistics. And so the United States has to be called into task. OBGYN physicians and their history has to be unpacked and called to task. And there has to be a movement to really shift the consciousness around having a complementary care model where midwifery becomes the centerpiece of caregiving to women and families. And this really goes back to even beyond the United States. There was no such thing as a physician 100 years ago. The midwife was the healer for the community. She was really more like a primary health care physician. And so this is why I tell people all the time, when you know your history, it really, really changes the dynamic of your mind. It changes what you can speak to, and it changes what you can share in different environments to offer a space of enlightenment. Women don't know. In the United States, you have a baby with a doctor. And so when I talked about midwifery hiding, I'm also talking about midwives hiding. Doulas didn't hide. Okay, so that's how doulas made it further than midwives. Okay, midwifery is so, I tell students, this is a profession that you will enter. If it is a calling you take, I call it, I actually, last Wednesday was the keynote speaker at Downstate's Blessing of Hands and White Coat ceremony. I told the midwives there, you're entering a profession of warfare. There is no other profession. Midwifery is arguably the oldest profession that women were able to make money since the beginning of time, and it has been under siege since the beginning of time. Okay, it is still under siege, and what we are battling against is so unbelievably profound. So a midwife, no matter what race, color, creed you are, you enter into this kind of with a knowingness that you're going to be traumatized. And I think the trauma that all midwives have had has made us hide. And because we hid, that's how doulas were able to move forward, because they didn't hide.
The only thing I would add to that is amen.
I would also add, to really be thinking, if you want to even think locally, and, I know I'm standing on sort of NYU ground here, but there are hospital systems that don't integrate midwifery care. NYU being one of them, this is deeply, deeply problematic. All of those big private systems do not utilize and have well-integrated midwifery service. They will welcome doulas into their into their birth rooms because of this idea that they're non-threatening and that the doulas will ultimately sort of soften the experience, right, or the trauma of that labor and pregnancy birth care is going to cause. But are we calling out our leadership and saying, hey, CNOs, where are the nurse midwives on your services? Is the physician power structure so dominant that you can't give access for midwives to have admitting privileges and for midwives to practice their model of care, which is different than the medical model of care? Are you making the space, the time, giving the money and the understanding of welcoming that model into your system and having what women want, listen to what women want, because they do want our care? But what is preventing that, I think, is that big word with the P that ends with the Y. It's patriarchy. And that medicine in the US and around the world is steeped in that way of knowing and in that way of moving through the world. So in that way, midwives do become the big disruptors in a way.
And not to invite them into your space, but not invite them into your space. Not invite them into your space and then dictate what they do. The midwife is the purveyor of the birth rights. The midwife attends the woman in labor, and the woman births her baby into the midwife's hands. And so if we are subjugating midwives to triage spaces or using them more in a physician's assistant manner and having them first assist on C-section only, and really not letting them be the vanguards of the space for the women to have the birth experience that they desire, then we don't have midwifery services.
So we have time for one more question.
I want to thank you very much for addressing the problem in the healthcare institutions themselves. As they become larger integrated systems, their focus is on paper, safety, and satisfaction. But yet when we look at the mortality statistics for women related to birthing among African Americans is the highest. So my question to you is, how can we as nurses, whether we're midwives or not, impact these institutions that exist in our communities?
Just say it. No, because you said it.
Okay. What I said to Sasha was that there also needs to be a conversation about the relationship between nurses and midwives. It has, I can bear witness to this, it has been, and I would imagine probably continues to be in some places, quite contentious. We work against each other. I have, is the word weathered? Okay. I have weathered that almost for the 6 years that I was practicing as a clinical midwife. It was amazing to me to see how the nurses treated me, asking me what made me better than them. And so when you had to fight to be at the table with the resident and fight to be at the table with the nurses, and then take care of your patient, you weathered every single day. So we need to talk about, what is the midwife's place? Who is she really, or he really, a threat to? Are we not all one? Do we not all have the same mission? Do we not all have the same vision and values? Do we not all add value to the patients, the clients, the families, and the communities that we work in? Do we not make all of the hospital systems, when they let us, make it better? And if all of us have the same mission, vision, and values, What are we fighting for?
I think we're going to end there.
Take a moment, please stand and show the wonderful panelists how much On behalf of NYU Myers, I thank you. Everyone in this room is a leader, and we each have our own place to make a difference, to be a vanguard, a disruptive innovator, and to continue the work that all of you have shown us so brilliantly. I think we can all say that they really honor the legacy of Estelle Osborne with their fierceness and their excellence. So before I invite you across the curtain or the divide, hoping that none of you gave up food or drink for Lent, let me just say this, that every year, this celebration just becomes more and more energetic and developed, and it's going to be hard to top this one. So I appreciate it all so very much. So thank you for attending, and we'll now move into the second part of today's celebration. And once again, if you look around, the room is full. It's really amazing. And so this is exactly what we'd hoped for. And thank you for making it possible. I'll see you across the curtain.